So I'm here to talk about how to engage people in natural heritage through cultural heritage. We all need to reach people. All through human time, throughout the globe, all over the world, we humans have been telling ourselves stories about plants and animals. And these stories help us understand who we are. They help us understand where we live. They help us survive. And the stories evolved through millennia and through generations as people lived with unique ecosystems all over the world. And the Caribbean is incredibly rich, not only in awesome ecosystems, but also in folk tales and traditions starring the plants and wildlife in those ecosystems. And these stories, these folklore, some of which we heard earlier today, they're a really important part of local and regional cultural heritage. They can also be a link to Amerindian folkways and heritage that aren't necessarily from that island or from that region. They can be a link to African traditions and folkways. And just like the species that inspired them, these stories and the traditions can be the same across the whole region, just from a couple islands, or in just one special place. So I'll start by sharing a couple examples. Does anybody know this tree? Is anyone familiar with this? Yeah. Some people call it silk cotton tree, some call it kapok or ceiba. And it's native to the Caribbean, and it's really important in folklore and folk tales across the region. So I'm going to share one from St. Martin with you guys. Has anybody ever heard of the sucouillon, sucouillon? Yeah, it has like different names and powers on different islands. So on St. Martin, it's not a spirit. It's a living human person who has incredible powers. And in their daily life, they're said to be really successful. Like maybe it's in business or politics, or they always get to win the beauty contest, something like that. But at night, the sucouillon goes to the silk cotton tree, so goes to this tree, takes off their skin, rolls it up, and puts it in the roots of the tree. And then without their skin, they climb up the tree. And when they get on the branches, they transform into a giant fireball. And they fly through the night, and they sneak into people's houses, and they suck their blood. That's how they get their power. And if you want to keep them out of your house, you have to put salt across your windows and doors. This is, this is what you do in St. Martin. And then before morning, they fly back to the tree to climb back down, put their skin back on, and then they can walk around looking like everybody else. So the silk cotton tree is really important for this. It's their special base where they transform. Sometimes traditions themselves can be actively protecting flora and fauna and habitats. You guys might even know of some of these. One example for the same tree, the silk cotton tree, in a lot of places in the Caribbean, people call it a jumbie tree or a duppy tree. And it's believed that spirits, jumbies or duppies, live inside the trees, so it's a really bad idea to cut one down. Because if you do, all those spirits inside are set free to cause trouble. So this cultural heritage, this folklore, helps to protect the natural heritage. In this case, it's preventing this native tree from getting cut down. Mark, this is where your guest starring is about to happen. Mark is going to pass out some leaves of this plant so you guys can take a look and smell it and touch it. Does anybody know it? It looks slightly different on different islands, has a really strong smell. It's used a lot in cooking and traditional medicine. And again, it's one of these things that has a ton of different names. And on the island of Nevis, they call it Jumbie sticky thyme. And a bush doctor there told me that this local name comes from a traditional belief, and you guys will maybe understand why when you get a whiff of it. If you rub the strong smelling leaves on your skin, That strong smell will keep the jumbies off you so you can go home safely. So nature is protecting you, which is really nice. What? And it keeps the mosquitoes off too, so it's protecting you in a couple different ways. This is an example of folklore that can have an African link, because the plant itself is from Africa. So, does anyone recognize this bird? Anyone know that? Yeah. It's an oil bird, and they live in caves. They're nocturnal. And they use echolocation to find food and navigate around in their caves. And so to do that, they're making these screeching, shrieking, clicking noises, which are incredibly eerie. So not only are they making really super spooky sounds, they're also making them in the dark of night and dark, mysterious caves. So it's not a surprise that there's some folklore happening around this. And Kishan Mahabir, who some of you guys might know from other conferences, he shared with me that in Trinidad, the caves where these birds live are thought of as gateways to the underworld. And the oil birds are very tied into this because their eerie calls sound like mournful spirits. This could also be an example of folklore protecting wildlife and habitats, because you don't necessarily want to venture into the underworld. So it could be protecting these fragile ecosystems. That's my speculation. So sharing and exchanging these stories and traditions is a good thing to do because it helps preserve and pass on this intangible cultural heritage. And it's also a great way to get people thinking about the plants and the animals and the wild spaces that inspired these stories and traditions, highlighting the plants and animals that play a starring role in cultural heritage gives you a different way to get people engaged with them and see why they're worth protecting. You know, this is part of our culture. We should protect it in nature. So how do you do that? Like, how do you start highlighting these stories? The good news is that there's a lot of ways, and here are some that worked for us. You can make exhibits or interpretive panels. They can be temporary, they could be permanent. You could partner with a local museum or a library or another community center to have a place to display them. If you make a lightweight one, you can actually rotate it around a lot of different spaces you can share. We created these outdoor panels for a Museum Naturalis, and that's our free natural history museum on St. Martin. So those are outside in our museum, but they would be great at a ranger station, so it can kind of become also an interpretive center. You could put them on nature trails. This is a panel we made about the flamboyant tree. So it's not native, but it's a heritage tree that is important for birds and habitat. And on St. Martin, this tree is really deeply connected with emancipation and our traditional Ponam dance. So the panel explains that and also explains the traditional use of the flowers and pods for games and musical instruments. And you guys might have important local artists, could be authors, could be musicians, could be dubstep musicians, for those of you who saw the earlier presentation. People who are featuring plants and wildlife in their work, you know, creating cultural heritage. For example, for this other flamboyant panel that we did, we partnered with the renowned St. Martin artist Roland Richardson, and the flamboyant tree is his signature subject. So the panel has images of some of his iconic paintings. It has an essay that he wrote about the tree, and we put both of these panels on display next to a flamboyant tree. You can't tell it's a flamboyant because it was really dry when Mark took this picture, but I promise you, it's a flamboyant. So this is another installation. This is a poem in St. Martin dialect by Yaya Richards. She's an important cultural figure on St. Martin, now passed, but she wrote this amazing poem called Fish Pond. It's about a pond called Fish Pond, which is an important bird habitat. And we put it up in this viewpoint that's overlooking the pond. And this poem is an elegy of all the traditions that were connected with the pond, all the fish and wildlife that used to be in it, and how, when the pond was polluted, these traditions were lost along with the wildlife. So it really poignantly speaks to how habitat destruction also destroys culture and traditions that are connected with these natural places. So on tours and school visits, it's a really powerful opportunity to talk about protecting our wild spaces, the different ways that's important, and how we can do it. You can also do presentations and discussions for local groups. We've done some about local plant traditions with a senior citizens group. Then we gave away plants that they could plant at home and make more bird-friendly backyards. At our Endemic Animal Festival this year, we had a station where we gave away free plants and also did tradition sharing. So local volunteers gave away free plants, again, to encourage people creating bird-friendly backyards. And they were also sharing traditional uses of plants. And people who came to the event were also sharing what they knew. So you could do this in high traffic areas or at libraries, places like that. If you have a couple local plants to look at, that's great. If you can't grow enough to give away, that's fine. Just give away seeds. We also record oral histories. And we share those oral histories online and on Facebook, so they're not just going into archives somewhere. You can find a lot of great cultural information about nature through oral histories and interviews. And then you can make it available for everybody to engage with. You can also share traditions and stories. Oh, what did I do? Sorry. Yes, all right. You can share them online. You can share them through newspaper articles. You could give radio interviews about them. There's a lot of different ways to share. Something that we haven't done yet, but that I really want to try, is hosting local storytelling at our events. So like Migratory Bird Festival, Caribbean Endemic Festivals. I really want to do that. That's Anansi. Here is a recap list. I have one in Spanish and French as well. So here's a recap list if you want to take a picture. There is so much possibility for stuff you can do. We already know about a book that incorporates traditions from the Grenadines that we heard about earlier. So here it is in Spanish. So I will close by inviting you to come up with creative ideas of how to share these things. And also to share your stories and traditions about Caribbean plants and animals with us. You can email me at this address. And we will also be doing sort of a hosting and recording of heritage sharing here at the conference during free times tomorrow. So please come by. I'll save the questions until later, which will be right after this session, I believe. And I would like to say thank you. Thank you, everyone.